Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. I'm Charles Renner, Public-Private Partnership Practice Group Leader for the Husch Blackwell Law Firm, and we've been having a continuing conversation with regards to our industry over the last 2 years now, initiating into the start of COVID, and really getting to a point where we can have a discussion about the varying relevant topical impacts of the project delivery focus that many of us have, and everyone in the audience as well. So we have been tracking the complexities between public-private partnership, project delivery going into COVID, and then trying to have some anticipation of what we thought was going to happen with this industry as the large period of uncertainty started. And as you'll see as we get into this a little bit, surprisingly to me, maybe not to everyone, but the project delivery activity level has really accelerated. And when I'm thinking about that, I kind of look at some of the technology companies in our space and that have grown throughout all of this. And, at some level, there's that truism that periods of volatility can accelerate trends that were there already. And the role of technology in our world clearly was a growing trend and has increased rapidly in the professional setting as well as the project delivery setting. And the role of integrated complex project delivery is accelerated as well. And so we're happy to be continuing this conversation with you, and very happy about the topic we're getting in today, which is not even just the opportunities relative to project deliveries and technology, but also management of the threats. We look at P3 as really a risk allocation, risk management vehicle, and the role of technology in that consideration is only growing. And there's some fairly good high-profile opportunities to identify that threat as well. So we're very excited to have this discussion with you today. Before we do begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. One of which is we're going to go through some polling questions as we go through the discussion to help kind of inform the dialogue in the Q&A section as well. So please participate in that. And then if you have any questions for our panelists during the webcast, please submit those via the question box. Now, we'll try to answer all questions during the webcast today, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it'll be answered later via email. We work hard to do that as well. PDF of the presentation is available in the resources folder. And for those of you that this helps, the program has been approved for legal education hours. So to report your hours, just simply click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Toward the end of the program, please be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs, and we do certainly rely on the feedback that you provide during those surveys to keep track of how we can better inform these discussions. So please do that. Toward the end of the program, we will try to make sure that any questions that haven't been answered, as I indicated earlier, will be responded to. So if we do not respond to your question, please make sure that you can feel free to email me directly, and we'll track that down. That may be just because we don't have your contact information in the attendance sheet as well. Before we begin, just a little context of what we're going to do. We've got some great speakers today. I'm going to provide a little bit of context of where we are in the overall market, what we've seen, kind of a reinforcement of some of the comments I made earlier, what we've seen in the P3 market, and then get into the specific topic and the focus today, which is really around cybersecurity. And truly, when a cyber attack shut down cross-country impacted the gas pipeline on the East Coast last spring, in our world, the interdependence and risk between public infrastructure and technology were certainly laid bare. And often, one of the values in P3 discussions is really the value of technology and innovation. And as I said earlier, that's really through an opportunity component. But the importance of threat management, and particularly when you're integrating private teams and public teams together on long-term project delivery, becomes of heightened importance. And whether it is impact of project management and delivery on infrastructure, strategic defense management, ransomware attacks, credential harvesting, wire fraud, network infiltration, any number of the topics that sometimes, at least people in my position, we don't think about so much. We are aware they're there. But what we do think about in project delivery is the importance of recognizing where our core competencies are not, and engaging the expertise and support to add that core competency to the team so that the long-term expectations of the project are matched. And that's why in today's discussion, going from management of the heightened exposure to cybersecurity risks, operation technology evolutions, the legal consequences of those obligations, and what best practices are going to be important for us. And it's also why we're very happy to have industry leaders in our panel. We have Jim Cook, the COO with Velta Technology, a technology-based company that really has a large expertise in providing cybersecurity and risk management to existing systems, which is something that's certainly important to all of us. We're also going to hear from Paul Torres, Director of the Cybersecurity Practice with KPMG, an advisor that plays a key role, if not in all of the alternative project deliveries, either on the public or private side, but in certainly full service and recognition of cybersecurity in that context. And then my colleague, David Strauss, a partner with Husch Blackwell, who leads our cybersecurity practice group. And for me, this is a great opportunity to have the technology-based expertise speak in the context of project delivery and help us to start to focus this as an important part, either in procurement and an added value context, or as a customer, and certainly in management and project delivery. What I would like to do is first, and I advanced the slide a little bit too much, sorry about that. What I'd like to do is first begin, before we start laying out the status of the market, is get a little bit of feedback from the audience as to what your anticipation is in a alternative project delivery setting through the next calendar year. This is one of a few poll questions that we'll have for you all during the webinar. So if you wouldn't mind submitting your responses on that, and we'll pause for just a quick second and then recognize the responses and then continue. Okay, thank you. And if you look there, overall in the breakdown is do you anticipate a project delivery occurring in the next really 12 plus months? Roughly a little under a third yes, 40+% no, and another third unsure. And interestingly enough, this is fairly in line with the annual survey we do as our public-private partnership trends report. And often is the case, there's a little bit of a breakdown between the responses on the private versus public side. And that's one thing we typically see, a little higher yes response on the private side. The public side is a little bit behind that, and anticipating where you're going to be in the next 12 months is always a good question as well. For context sake, none of that is surprising to me. Most of the larger alternative project deliveries that we've worked on have been priorities for about a 6-year period, and traditional delivery has not been a feasible option, and that's when you transition into these larger alternative project deliveries. However, as much as that's been consistent for the last several years, one of the things that we do with our P3 group is track the annual trends in the project delivery market, both by volume as well as by project type. And one of the things that up until the COVID moment we've noticed is really post 08-09 fiscal crisis, there's been a slight but incremental growing trend in project deliveries of this type in the market, in the US market. During COVID, that response rate on project starts has escalated significantly, which we'll show you in just a moment. One of the things that I would recognize here is one of the larger sectors we see higher volume is the higher education market. And that's been a combination of campus growth plans and infrastructure needs as well. And then the other comment I would make, particularly for this audience, is that telecom-based project deliveries have started to show up in a more frequent response rate. And in a separate conversation we had, I think there's a lot of indications that you're going to see a growth in that market, really tied to the federal infrastructure program. There's been a lot of recognition of telecom project delivery as a priority in the state and urban markets. And as federal funding is looking more and more likely, at least in the context of the last several years, I don't know how likely anything looks out of DC, but regardless, we've seen a growth in that as well. And in the project starts, we'd expect to see an increase in that market. But that being said, this is the slide indication that we think is one of the more relevant ones for our industry and definitely for the topic today. And that is the significant growth in project activity that has been tied to the volatility of the moment. As I indicated earlier, from 08-09 through 2018, really, there has been a steady increase in alternative project delivery, both procurements and starts. And then, as we recognize, this is a completely different moment for us. And in that regard, the partnering for complex projects, the recognition that this tool is a feasibility option, and I think also as a resource to continue to proceed during uncertainty, the increased rate in project starts has been significant. And I think, as I said earlier, from the technology space, we certainly would look at certain industries and delivery models that had growing trends in an upward direction, where that became an expedited trend during the COVID time. And so we still see that occurring. And as a result, between the increased priority in this topic and the increase in project starts, we think we're hopefully going to be in a position to give you great information on an important topic. Just for context sake, where we've seen a lot of projects really continue activity in the coastal markets, and then through the central states, you really get a larger volume as you increase down into the southern states, which has been a consistent trend that we've seen. So that's the context for the project type that generates a lot of these discussions. But it's the expertise in the relevance of cybersecurity and context that has really drawn us here all today. And so I'm very excited to have a panel of experts that I'm going to spend a lot of time learning from. By the time we get to questions, I'm sure we all will as well. And I want to begin with introducing, as I mentioned earlier, the COO of Velta Technologies, Jim Cook, to take us into the discussion. Jim?
Hey, thanks, Charles. I'm going to open up first with a poll question. And OT, operational technology, is what it stands for. And that is the automated machinery, whether you're in an industrial environment. I know we've got a mixed group on here. Some may use the term, but that's, whether it's the pumping stations or the bottling plant or even some of the IoT that is out in your environment, the things that produce things, the physical outcomes. So that's the OT. It's a very common term that's used. And here is the question of who owns that responsibility from the cyber threats, right? That's a challenge that we always see within organizations. It falls through the cracks, and ownership's important. So I'll give it a minute here. Well, not a whole minute, a few seconds for a few more answers to chime in. And in your organizations, then who owns that? Is it the engineers out on the floor running those machines? Is it your IT group? Is it a management problem? Or do you not know? Okay, got a couple more floating in. All right. We'll go ahead. Oh, there's a few more, and I'm going to go ahead and see what we have here. Got to hit the right button, and there we go. IT organization is half. Interesting. Large portion, 34, all of the above. It's true, right? We'll touch on that a little bit. Other, be interesting to know who else is out there, and then don't know. So this is interesting because that is a challenge when we talk about the specific ownership of those threats, of the OT and the IT challenges. But it's good to keep in mind as we move forward. Something, I thought we had maybe a SCADA engineer. I think we would have got another vote in there. Let me first open with who we are, Velta Technology. We are the people that deploy and service those solutions that are protecting the automated machines that are out there. From the critical infrastructure, you think of all the SCADA systems and automation that exist, from whether it's providing your energy or gas in the pipeline and the pumps, or your waters or your utilities, and the industrial operations, which have a very similar, that have the same issues, not just similar, the same issues, because they're using much of the same type of equipment. And we work with the IT groups and the OT groups, the operational, the engineers, and the risk owners to create those capabilities that can provide actionable results to protect or respond and ultimately reduce risk in the organization. And we consider ourselves the practitioners. If you look over my, I'm not sure if I'm flipped here, but it is my left. You can see my hard hat and my spider Halloween decoration. We're out there on the walking those industrial floors and taking a look at that equipment that runs and working with organizations to build that protection for cybersecurity and others, which we'll get into here. So the thing to remember is the difference is a bit with what we call the operational technology and the information technology. And the easy way for a simpleton like me to understand it is there's data outcomes, digital data outcomes, and then there's physical outcomes. But there's digital systems controlling those physical outcomes. And that's where we come in. And over the past few years, I think it's very obvious with the news of all these impacts that are occurring, as Charles mentioned earlier with the Colonial, the threats are increasing. Why are the threats increasing? Well, manufacturing pays. That's the cash register for the organization. And using the Colonial as an example, shutting down that pipeline and turning it back on versus paying the ransom, well, you can see where they went on that. It's also constantly new vulnerabilities. There's new technologies, change is constant. So the increase of cyber threats are out there in this space. In OT, the intentional versus the unintentional has to be taken into account too, because you don't want to forget the internal aspects of this. One of the things that we commonly see is if it's not managed properly, a lot of the IT actions can actually cause shutdowns of processing, whether it's scanning or updates or firewall changes. If you don't know the difference, internal threats can be just as impactful as external threats as these environments get more and more connected over time. And of course, remote access. I think we've all heard of COVID. Out there, it's might be on the news tonight. I'm not sure. It goes back to the old joke. Who's the number one change agent in our organization, forcing us into digital transformation? Now, that's COVID, right? So remote access is not only through your internal organization, get in your IT side to get it into your environments of email and file sharing and things such as this, webinars. But there's a lot of remote access that has been created to get into an operational environment, those industrial floors, those manufacturing floors, industrial floors that are running these operations. Now, I mentioned the differences. There's differences between the IT and the OT, and that's something to remember, especially since we have an audience that's heavy in, 50% that said IT is responsible for cybersecurity. Okay, that's great, but the IT cybersecurity solutions don't always work. One of the things that I say is much like real estate, right? What's the number one rule of real estate? Location, location, location. Well, what's the number one rule of IT cybersecurity? Patch, 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 right? Well, that doesn't apply in the OT environment. If you go out into an industrial floor of some kind, you're going to find that the age of the equipment out there, they haven't been patched in years. They were never intended to be connected to the internet. They're insecure by design. The life cycles are different. So they're just loaded with vulnerabilities without patching, and it's been going on for years. So that's just to name one. There's others, even like network latency is an issue where scanning can shut down, which is very common to occur in the IT environment. So with those that voted IT, I hope those IT people are also OT knowledgeable too, because they can be applying the same cybersecurity on the IT side and be just as much of an internal threat. So not to say that they're not, it really comes to working together. I like the people that answered all of the above, because that's really the answer. Another thing that comes out of the OT is air gap. We get a lot of that, quite frankly, and yeah, every client that said we're air gap. And what is air gap? Air gap means we're not connected to the internet. We're not connected. We haven't found one that said that they are air gap that actually is air gap when we start working with them. So that's a myth. That's a myth out there. Any organization that says that internally, you might want to validate, because we haven't found one yet that is. And then, as I mentioned, the ownership and oversight of these industrial assets. So who owns it? Who owns the resiliency? And who owns making sure that it operates every day? They need to be involved, and they need to own the protection and the resiliency of those operations. And it's not just the physical outcome. It is those digital systems that are controlling those physical outcomes. And then finally, another area is, those physical outcomes, those liabilities are increasing. I mean, because it's physical outcomes, there's risk to human life. Again, the oil out of the pipeline, Molson was impacted and their operations shut down. JBS, large meat producing in the country, their operation shut down. Just a microcosm of what could happen to certain organizations, certain points of the supply chain, and what could affect Obviously, we saw everything from the shortages on the Northeast to, well, I would have probably felt the Molson shutdown was I a Labatt's customer or something, but I wasn't. But the JBS, go to your store, there's no chicken wings. Imagine if it happens now. What is the impact if it's shut down more than a week? What is the impact to the food supply? So those are bigger, the liabilities, the risk to humans. And then cyber insurance, which is always a unique one. I remember back when I bought back in the day, and cyber insurance just came out, and I bought the first one, and I think it was somewhere around $25 million of coverage for $25,000. Well, it ultimately made sense to not shore up my cyber defenses because it would cost me $1 million and to shore it up. So just the math didn't work out. So we left the holes, bought the cyber insurance, rolled the dice. That's not happening anymore. What we're seeing this summer, because of all these impacts and the claims and the events, these insurance companies are pushing back, and we've seen denials over the past few months for insurance. Their requirements are going up, especially when it comes to companies that have the automated machinery out there and that can impact the core business. The stakes are just bigger for everyone. Okay. And this is, I like this picture. This was put in, and one of my favorites, because sometimes I think everyone feels that. With the attention and the pressure is moving beyond the technology group. You can't say this is a technology problem anymore. This is a true business problem. If you look at what companies have to disclose, especially the public ones moving forward. We've seen these events just this year. A lot of the events have occurred, but have been, it hasn't been necessary to disclose. We know of a lot of events that have occurred that fall under the confidential, but ultimately, who owns that risk and disruption of the business? And it's the business. And it's no longer just about the data loss that's occurring. When the business is shut down, that's pretty impactful. And I've talked to a lot of CFO buddies of mine, and they always tell stories about talking to their IT folks and zoning out after the first 30 seconds, and all they're trying to figure out is, okay, how much is this going to cost? Well, it's a different story now. You start pulling in what that insurance is and the liabilities and what it's going to do to impact the business. Can we continue to make money? Can we continue to produce? And especially in the critical infrastructure utility areas, can we still supply? Leaders love to talk about and focus on value creation, but value protection needs to be on that priority. I mean, it's about business resilience. You see, if you're familiar with Gartner, Gartner's a leading think tank research firm worldwide, talking about the liabilities moving up into, or they're predicting it to the executive level. An add-on to what they predicted too was also soon CEOs will not be able to plead ignorance. So it's moving up. It's no longer a technology problem. We're going to have to find a way to get the IT and the engineers and the executives and risk managers to work together to figure out what do we need to do as a business to protect ourselves. And finally, for my final slide here, frameworks and practices. I always like to start when we start talking about frameworks and they get a little heavy. I think we all know, I hope, that we all know what the number one rule of Fight Club is, right? Fight Club's got a number one rule, and it's not to talk about Fight Club. Well, one of the things with the multitude of different frameworks out there, and MITRE and NIST that are noted here, they all share the same number one rule. And it's not to talk about Fight Club. The framework's number one rule is always identify. And you cannot protect what you cannot see. So that's something to remember when you're looking at it. You don't need to, I like the NIST. MITRE's really good when you get technical and deep. NIST is pretty basic, but they all start with the first thing to do is identify. And since these machines they're automated, they're connected. You better know what your risks are. And if you're a fan or you get exposed to enterprise risk management, you know that first thing to do is identify what your risks are, evaluate them, and start working through. I think Paul in a minute will probably even talk a little bit about the framework of how to work through that. But what we're seeing is that these technologies out there that we're working with are quickly becoming standard practices. And it's about that monitoring. It's about the visibility. It's about seeing those assets and understanding what your risks are so you can start addressing them. And if you continue to create a blind eye, you're going to go back and look like the guy on the slide before. You don't want to be that guy when somebody says, well, why didn't you even look and see what your risks are? And so as these become very quickly to standard practices in these automated environments, it's going to be a reasonable expectation that you know what your risks are and you are continually moving forward to address those. And so if there's any questions, as Charles said, there'll be, I know there's a lot here. We'll have some opportunity at the end. And now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague over to Paul Torres from KPMG. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. I'm going to piggyback a lot of what Jim said. I think that's a very good presentation, and I can relate to a lot of them. Just quickly about KPMG and myself. KPMG, as you probably know, it's one of the big four consulting firm. I'm on the advisory cybersecurity practice. So I'm on the consulting arm of the firm doing a lot of the cyber work. I've been with the firm 17 years. And my primary focus is cybersecurity, building and assessing cybersecurity program, as well as BCDR and incident response. As you can imagine, the last few years, at least since 2019 when COVID kicked in, I've been a busy boy. I am happy to be alive and actually experience this because our world is changing. I agree with a lot of things that Jim presented, but let me spin it a little bit differently. As you can imagine, I do a lot of projects, cyber work with China, with Singapore, North America, all the way to the EU side. There is a lot of similarities as well as trend that it doesn't matter what you do, what industry you are, what business you're doing, we are all in this whole tornado. We are in it. What I'm going to focus though in my presentation is going to be more of what are those strategies and recommendations and some of the best practices that work for a lot of our firms, big, small, medium size, all of them. I'll share that with you. I'll make my presentations fairly short because I'm looking forward to your questions. You have a good panel in here with a lot of information. Please pick our brains. This is something that I enjoy sharing because, like I said, our world is changing and we need to have these best practices out there as quick as possible so that we can mitigate a lot of these risks that Jim just mentioned. So if you look at the first slide, it's nothing that I'm going to present here is going to have a jaw dropping. I just want to have a little bit of, let's step back a bit and see what happened to our world the last few years. I hate to say this, but COVID was an accelerator. Everything else that we are going to talk about, it was happening already. It's just a matter of time. It's almost like a perfect storm. Something dropped, COVID dropped in, and next thing you know, it just exploded. So if you look at the slide, cyber is always a risk. I presented to so many boards and audit committee meetings. Cyber was always there. It was there already, and then COVID kind of accelerated that. Emerging technology, Jim mentioned a few of them, 5Gs, IA, data analytics, all that stuff, it was already there. It's just a matter of time that it essentially blew up into something bigger, and then the cyber risk was embedded within that technology. OT, IT, awesome. That is something that it's still, I think Jim mentioned, it fell through the crack. I think most of us didn't really pay attention to it. I'm guilty of that. But now we do a lot of pen testing and we see vulnerabilities, especially in the manufacturing side, the industrial control systems, the PLCs. We see it from a lot of the smart buildings and smart campuses for higher eds, for hospitals, smart hospitals, smart homes. You give us an opportunity to exploit you as long as you have connectivity, as long as you have a vector, as long as you're connected to the network. That's enough, and that's scary because the bad actors are using the same technology that we're using to essentially exploit us. Not a good thing. But I'm glad that Jim spent a lot of time on the difference between OT and IT, because OT, just to emphasize, it impacts human life. That's different. Before IT, somebody takes your credit card information, personal information, healthcare information. It stings a bit, but OT is different now. Now it's life. It's health and safety becomes a risk. So it changes the whole landscape of cyber risk. A couple more things: increase of cloud migration. I think most of us know that there's a lot of this push already even before COVID, but because of, I'm going to pair up the remote working as well, because of those two, it really increased the ask for cloud providers. Keep in mind, though, that this is something that we all need to remember. Just because we threw all our processes and systems over the fence for another third party to provide us with that type of service, the risk doesn't disappear, right? The risk is always going to be there. It's just a matter of making it going to a different ownership. And again, the other thing that, Jim, I like is accountability. You still need to raise your hand, because even if you threw it on a third party, as the stakeholder, as an owner of that data in that system, you still need to have an accountability in terms of instituting control system to make sure, again, that the data is not compromised and the access is also controlled. Next slide, please. I have two more, and I promise I'm going to keep this short. The second slide, this is more of the 4 golden rules of cybersecurity. Somebody presented it, so I copied it from someone else within the firm. But one thing I like about this is that my background is engineering. I remember my professor keeps telling me, hey, Paul, keep it simple, stupid. The KISS mentality. And has always been my mantra when I approach things in any projects. Keep it simple. I gotta be honest with you. A lot of our clients, again, the big, medium, small, when the cyber risks start creeping up, COVID happened, there was an immediate knee-jerk reaction. Human nature, right? Let's throw some money in there. Let's spend the most, buy the most expensive monitoring tool to secure us, right? We're all guilty of that in personal life as well as professional life. But one thing I like about this is just keep it simple, right? Let's go back to, again, what Jim said, risk assessment. Identify those risks, because just because it happened to another organization doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. It almost like you need to, the risk assessment to me gives you an opportunity to really profile your organization. What are your threat vectors? Who are your enemies? What data do you have? Of all these domains and subdomains in cybersecurity framework, where you should focus your resources and your effort. That to me is a more solid, balanced mentality, right? That to me, that strategy is very effective. Keep in mind as well, there is a balance between technology, the tools that you're using, people that you're training, and making sure that you have the right skill set, as well as the processes. I hate to say this, but process governance, not the most shiny thing that we all like, but it is very important. If you have the balance of the three, I think if you approach your cybersecurity program that way, you're in the right spot. So quickly, the 4 things: get the basics right. For the most part, if you really, get into the granular detail in terms of how most of these bad actors compromise someone's system, it's access, right? And again, most of us, we grew up in Sarbanes-Oxley. There's a lot of these frameworks out there even before COVID and all this technology came out. It's access, right? Access, change management, SDLC, computer operation, backup system, DR, BC. Those are not new terminologies. These are terminology we've been used over the years. again, go back to basic and then build from there. Look at your crown jewel. The way I look at this in my head, it's your house is your entire network system. Your wife's diamond ring is more important than the pots and plates in the kitchen, right? Why do you need to secure your kitchen that much? Why invest so much? Let them steal the plates, let them steal the forks and the spoon, secure the one upstairs, the one that is really worth the most. Again, strategize, put the money where the risks are, put the resources where the highest risk and the critical risk, and then we visit that in an annual basis. Do your homework in the enemies. I'm an avid General Sun Tzu's book, right? The Art of War. Know your enemy. Understand what data you have. What they want to get out of it. Who's your enemy? Who's the ones trying to exploit you? Those are the things that would help you strategize better. And lastly is the cybersecurity should be part of your process. It's not a check the box. It's not a department within IT. It should be embedded within the culture. It should be embedded within your change management process. It should be part of your board meetings. It should be part of that. It shouldn't be an ad hoc or a check the box, because I think that unfortunately it's not going to go away, right? It's always going to be there. And then my last slide, it's essentially just that we can talk about strategy all day long. I want to keep it simple. What I noticed, a lot of our clients, they understand cybersecurity, but it's too wide, too deep. There's so many frameworks out there. NIST and ISO are the most common ones. CIS is coming out as well, but NIST is the one that I've noticed is very popular in a lot of organizations in all industries. My theory, number one, it's cheap, it's free. So you can grab it, you can download it, it's good. It's a little bit more wider. It picks up a lot of those domains and key domains that I think it's very critical to establish your cybersecurity program. So it's a good starting point. And a lot of the frameworks that you're going to come across to after that, as your cybersecurity program mature, it aligns with it. So I think if you want to keep it simple, start with something. This would be a good starting point. The reason why I kind of put this in this little bento box is for my own sanity, because when I joined a firm, I'm like, oh my God, there's so many subdomains and domains. What the heck do we do? How do I present this? And how do you strategize? Because every year, again, you need to reset this and make sure that you align your strategy, your audit, your assessment, your presentation to the board and audit committee. You need to, and in the regulatory requirements as well. Those they keep changing almost on an annual basis. What is that dashboard that you can use to kind of allow you to kind of reset and say, okay, what do we do now? Right? With all these changes, all these risk assessment that you just perform every year, what do? I like this dashboard because you don't get lost. It always goes, this is your homepage. So if you look at the purple boxes, that's the typical domains that should be, that we highly recommend should be included as part of your cybersecurity program. Keep in mind that each box, it can extrapolate to a little bit more subdomains. Again, another day that we can, happy to discuss that some other time. The blue box, which is the pen test vulnerability test, that's the traditional pen testing that we all know, the internal, external, web app, all that stuff still needs to be executed on an annual basis. I like that notion. And then the gray boxes, these are additional domains, depending on the changes to your environment, changes to your regulatory requirements, or incidents that occurred. You could essentially turn on some of these boxes and assess them deep, or revisit them and say, hey, how are we doing in the insider threat perspective or threat intelligence? So that's essentially to me, this is a good dashboard to come up with your plan, come up with your strategy on an annual basis. And lastly, I'm pretty sure you guys are aware of this, and I'm going to piggyback again what Jim said earlier. It's that Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident that occurred, I think it was May. Keep me honest on this one. May of 2021. Because of that incident, there was a output from the White House. I think she was the Deputy National Security Advisor for cyber, Ann Newberg, I think is her name. Again, please don't quote me on this one. So they issued a memo. So the White House issued a memo in terms of what was my theory is that that was the outcome of their investigation on the Colonial Pipeline. Five came out of that. They said patch management, which Jim mentioned, patch management, incident response, pen test has to be performed, business continuity and disaster recovery, and also segmentation of your network. None of those are brand new. Again, these are terminologies that we all know. I go back to what I mentioned earlier. Keep it simple. The basic controls, the basic fundamental domains that should be in place is still the same thing, right? Just keep it fresh, test it periodically, assess it periodically, and build from there. So again, we can talk about this all day long, but those are I would say, key items or key topics that I wanted to highlight. And then looking forward to your questions. Again, totally appreciate and to be part of this. And I'm going to give it to David.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. My name is David Stouse. I am an attorney, sorry to report, at Husch Blackwell, and a partner here and co-chair of the firm's Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice Group. We felt as sort of an endpoint to the great presentations that Jim and Paul have just delivered, that we just chat a couple minutes on sort of risk mitigation from a legal perspective. Obviously, Husch Blackwell is a law firm, so we obviously focus a lot on risk mitigation from a legal perspective. And just 4 topics I want to tease out for you guys. The first one is due diligence. So, Paul and Jim talked a lot about internal facing issues for great reason, right? About vetting yourself and making sure that your internal operations are up to snuff. But then there's this whole other world of the vendors that you use, the people who have access to your systems, the people who have access to your data, right? And so going through a deliberate due diligence process there is significant. It's important. And that's really a function in my mind of something that's IT and legal tackling those together. And if you're not familiar with that process, it typically is, it's a risk assessment is essentially what it comes down to. And Jim mentioned in his comments, he talked about, he put up, I think it was the NIST slide, and he talked about like knowing your data, right? And that was the first step in any, NIST or ISO, anywhere that you want to go. The first step is know your data. And that's really in this due diligence as well. Know what data is being transferred, know what data they have access to. The reason for that is probably fairly obvious, right? If you don't know the data that they have access to, you can't value the risk of that data and what would happen to it if you lost it, or if your vendor lost it, or your partner lost it, or somebody got in through their system and then was able to pivot into your system. So understanding the data, the sensitivity of the data, and then for us as well, we like to understand the legal consequences of that data, right? If that data was lost, is there a legal consequence to that? You have to tell somebody. You have to tell a regulator. You have to tell the individuals that there's been a breach, all those types of things, right? And so, we want to understand exactly what those risk factors are and that legal significance. And then it drills into really the disciplines that Paul and Jim were talking about, which is ensuring that you can secure that data, right? And ensuring that that vendor, that third party who's going to access that data is properly securing it using industry standard techniques. So that's topic number 1. Topic number 2 then is incident response. And it's been talked about a lot as well by Paul and Jim and really providing some good details there. What we think about it from a legal perspective is pre-planning, right? I mean, this is like the football game analogy, right? I mean, 2 weeks ago, I'm in a Denver office, right, of the firm. 2 weeks ago, the Denver Broncos took the field for the opening play, and they took a delay of game, right? I mean, like if you do anything, right, you've got to at least you've had all week to get that one play to your quarterback, right? How could you possibly take a delay of game on the first on the first snap from scrimmage? This is unforced error, right? And so we think about incident response planning from a legal perspective, as opposed to an IT perspective. We think about making sure we're not running into unforced errors, right? So let's have an incident response plan in place. And the idea behind that is not like, hey, IT calls and we've got a ransomware attack or you can't log into your computers. The idea is not that you go into your drawer and you pull out a 30-page document and you start thumbing through it, right? Like, that's not the concept, right? The concept is you've thought through how you would respond to an incident in advance, and you've lined up. So you know who the team is, you know how that you're going to communicate with one another. You understand your external vendors, right? So here's another good example. A couple of weeks ago, a client calls and says, hey, we have a potential ransomware attack. We've identified people that are in our system. We don't think it's been launched yet. What should we do? And the answer is, we'll call your and external forensics vendor who knows your systems and get them to start cleaning it up for you. And they say, well, we haven't identified them yet, right? It took 2 days to get that lined up. Now, the internal team was working on it during that time, but it took 2 days to get the experts, the forensic experts, lined up to respond. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. That's the last place scenario that you want to be in, right? So what you really want to do is you want to use this incident response planning to identify these issues and then talk through scenarios, right? So that's that tabletop exercises bullet point there, right? Sit down with the leadership in a room and go through scenarios. You know, I started one a few years ago with a client where I did a ransomware one, right? It was CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation, had a ransomware attack, and it was brutal. It was just absolutely brutal out here. They got hit twice, actually. And the question I presented to the client was, would you pay the ransom, right? And everybody says, no, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't negotiate with terrorists, right? We would never pay the ransom. But then you start talking about, well, how much is the ransom, right? And you start thinking about through these issues, and it becomes a lot more murkier. It becomes a lot more complicated. And I'm not saying whether you should or should not pay the ransom. That's not the point. The point is like, these are the questions that you want to at least have some familiarity with in calm times when it's not chaos and confusion, right? Because that's what an incident is going to be. It's going to be the threat of the unknown. You don't know what's happening, and you want to mitigate that as much as possible. All right. So number 3, then, moving along.
David, we lost your audio here.
Is that better?
Excellent.
Yeah, sorry about that. Somehow it went on mute. So I was talking about data processing agreements, and hopefully didn't miss too much there. But essentially the concept there is that when you're transferring data to another entity, you want to have a contract in place. You want that contract to say certain things, like keeping it confidential, securing that data, not allowing that other entity to transfer that data to other companies as well, right? And then what we really focus in on here, because this is, as the slide says, risk mitigation, right? What you really want to focus in on here is the liability provisions as well, right? If we're going to share this data set, then we want to make sure that other entity is protecting it, but it's also, if it loses that data, that it's defending and indemnifying us for any of those losses. Every state in the United States has a data breach notification statute. And those statutes say if you lose certain data like name and social security numbers, credit card information, and the list goes on, that you have to notify people, right? Well, if you transferred your data set to another entity and they lose that data, they should be responsible for paying for that, not you. So we really want to address those issues up front. And then the final thing, insurance. And there was a great comment from one of our participants today about cybersecurity insurance, and he hit the nail on the head, which is basically like, yeah, but it's really expensive right now. And there's been a huge shift in the market with cybersecurity insurance. I feel like, 5-6 years ago, it was it was cheaper, I should say. I'm not, cheap is relative, right? But the market really has changed because of the number of attacks we see, and the prices for getting insurance have gone up substantially, right? It is not the same, in my mind, risk mitigation technique that it was 5 years ago, where you could basically insure against it because the cost of insurance has gone up so much. And so that really just changes dynamics. I'm not saying don't have cyber insurance. You should absolutely unequivocally have cyber insurance, but it's not the wholesale, that's going to protect us. that it used to be. And we're seeing insurance carriers push back on costs as well, to be more deliberate about the review of costs. Hey, was this covered? Was that covered? That we really just didn't see, 3-4 years ago. And I'll say as well that insurance piece really ties into that data processing agreement piece, right? Because you want to shift that liability off when your data set's transferred. Okay. Last slide I'll have, and I only have a couple seconds on this one, is, for those of you who are out there, I mean, Paul and Jim really talked about how, like, the IT space is changing substantially. The legal space in this country is just in complete flux, right? We have now California, Colorado, and Virginia who have enacted broad consumer privacy legislation, and more states are going to follow. And if it's an interest to you, use the QR code there. You can pull up and kind of see where we're going as a country. But I say from a legal perspective, this is the start, not the end, right? We're going to have this conversation for a number of years until things firm up. With that, I will turn it back to Charles to sum up, I suppose.
Thanks, David, and thanks, everybody. And I'm going to make an executive decision here to bypass this last poll question, but for reasons of just picking up off of what David had commented on with regards to insurance. In project delivery, a lot of times when the public and private partnership is arranged and we're going through contract negotiations, this is certainly, there's a lot of time focused on what the purpose of the partnership is, the project delivery, also the risk allocation, particularly when you're relying on your partner to pick up some responsibilities. And often in that process, the potential to insure around that risk is a great management tool in any number of aspects. David, you had mentioned the evolution of the insurance market in this area, or devolution at some level. And that was really one of the first questions we got. And so what I was hoping to do was Paul and Jim ask you in that order to give us a little bit of your perspective on the insurance option and market in the cybersecurity space and how you see that fitting into this risk management tool, short-term and long-term. Maybe Paul, you could respond to that briefly, and then Jim.
Yes, I can, and I totally, I agree with what David's been saying. I'll package it this way. The incident response is key now. You think about it, the position of most organizations has changed. Before it was more protect. Now it's more of, oh crap, it's going to happen to us. It's just a matter of time, right? So the incident response, as well as the ransomware payment policies and approaches, is evolving. That's not solid yet. The best practice has not been determined yet, and the insurance is part of that. Going back to the balance, right? How much, again, leadership board has to identify this, the risk mitigation, what they're willing to take the risk, right? The insurance comes as a component of that, not just singular. It's that whole strategy, right? Most organizations that I've seen, they will not pay a lot of insurance because they will invest more on preventative and other type of controls within the ecosystem. So it is a decision that has to be made by leadership, as long as they've identified the risk, and if they're open to that mitigation, then they can make the decision in terms of how much are they willing to invest on insurance.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Jim, what's your perspective on that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I saw the comment too, and I agree wholeheartedly. The insurance company actually is part of the problem. I wrote a bit a few months ago where it's this whole cycle. I was fortunate enough to be on both ends of where we are now with the insurance, making that initial insurance decision and saying, wow, this stuff's so cheap. It's as cheaper to buy insurance, transfer my risk over the insurance than it is to invest in all the cybersecurity. Well, quite frankly, I wasn't the only one that did it. The entire industry did it, right? So the entire industry started buying all this insurance instead of investing in making this a priority in the business, because it's easier to transfer it over to the insurance situation. I mean, but that was the first thing the insurance industry probably ever sold, with no backup data on what the true risks are. I mean, you got actuaries and they're data driven, but I think they set the rates with the same guys that set lines for the football games, right? I mean, and so now we've created this decade where we just bought insurance, didn't invest in cybersecurity, and now time to pay the piper, right? And now I'm on the other end going, holy cow, they're starting to cancel insurance. They're losing their butts. So they're raising the rates. They're decreased. Claims are going up. Coverages are going down. The requirements going up. 4 times increase. And now that's where the space where we're in, especially around the physical impact of it, is okay. Well, what are you doing about that? That's what the insurance companies say. We got to reduce our risk and exposures here because it can get big. Right. And I didn't even get to make a lawyer joke, but I mean, once lawyers get involved after something like this, it gets bigger and it's going to blow out your coverage. It goes out of cybersecurity insurance. It's in your commercial property. It's in your disruption. I'm not sure where it falls with the industrial critical infrastructure side, but all those secondary, third impacts of these physical impacts get bigger. We've worked with clients very recently here that are going, well, how do we mitigate that? How do we mitigate that for the insurance company? Because those rates, we can't go without cyber insurance, but they're not offering it. So it's now going to be the driver. They're the ones that cause, they're an element of the cause of the situation that we were in, which I agree with the comment earlier. But now by changing their behavior, they're the element of cause of how we're going to have to address those things moving forward.
Thanks, Jim. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to our panel. This is exactly what we want to be doing, talking to the technical experts about important parts of these complex partnerships. We definitely had a full discussion. I had 2 goals. 1, to do that, and 2, to run out of time before Jim got to a lawyer joke. So I think we hit both. And with that, I want to thank everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, this presentation will be available later as well, and we can send that to you. I said we've got a couple of requests already. So thanks, everybody, and I hope everyone has a great day. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.